The world faded to amber through the scope. Thomas Reynolds lay motionless on the sun-baked ridge, his weathered face pressed against his rifle stock. A sandstorm raged across the valley, reducing visibility to almost nothing for the untrained eye. For Reynolds, it created perfect cover. 3 miles away, a Delta Force team had walked into an ambush, pinned down in a dried riverbed, outgunned and outflanked. No air support possible in these conditions. No rescue coming. Reynolds controlled his breathing, feeling his heartbeat slow to that familiar, steady rhythm. Through his scope, he could make out the insurgent commander directing the assault from what he thought was a safe distance. The man stood partially concealed behind a stone wall, 200 meters from Reynolds' position. The target moved behind cover, then emerged again. Reynolds tracked him, calculating wind speed, air density, bullet drop. The sandstorm complicated everything, shifting the variables with each gust. An impossible shot by any standard measure. Reynolds exhaled slowly and pressed the trigger. The bullet cut through the storm, traveling for nearly 2 full seconds before finding its mark. The insurgent commander collapsed. Confusion erupted among his men. The Delta team seized the moment, breaking the ambush and fighting their way to safety. No one would ever know who had taken that shot. No one except the Delta operators who owed their lives to a man they'd never meet. Just another ghost story from the mountains of Afghanistan. Thomas "Ghost" Reynolds, the most lethal sniper in Special Forces history, vanished from military records after recording 317 confirmed kills. But the true legend wasn't what Thomas Reynolds had accomplished. It was who he had secretly trained to follow in his footsteps. The bus lurched to a stop outside Fort Campbell's main gate. Olivia Reynolds pressed her palm against the window, watching armed guards check identification with methodical precision. 18 years old and exactly 54. Tall, she knew what everyone would see when she stepped off this bus. They would see a kid. They would see someone who looked like she should be heading to college orientation, not basic combat training. Olivia adjusted the small duffel bag on her lap, the only possession she had brought with her. Inside were 3 changes of clothes, a photograph of her grandfather, and nothing else. No phone, no journal, no trinkets from home. She had learned long ago that carrying too much made you slower, made you vulnerable, made you someone who could be followed by the weight of things left behind. The driver cranked the door open with a hydraulic hiss. Olivia stood, moving down the narrow aisle past 2 other recruits who had barely spoken during the 6-hour drive from the processing center. Both were men. Both looked like they had played football in high school. McNally and Torres, according to the names they'd barked during introductions. Both had spent the entire ride talking about how they were going to dominate every drill, every exercise, every challenge the Army could throw at them. Neither had asked her name. Her boots hit the asphalt and the September heat wrapped around her like a fist. The sky stretched overhead, cloudless and brutal, the kind of blue that promised no mercy. Across the parking lot, a drill sergeant stood with his arms crossed, watching the handful of recruits stumble off the bus with their bags and their assumptions about what the next 4 months would hold. Master Sergeant Walker was a man carved from granite, his silver hair cropped close to his skull, his face bearing the weathered look of someone who had seen 4 combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. His eyes moved across the formation with the cold assessment of someone who had seen thousands of recruits just like them and knew exactly how many would wash out before week 3. "This is Delta Company," he said, voice carrying across the asphalt without shouting. "For the next 16 weeks, you belong to me. You will eat when I tell you to eat. You will sleep when I tell you to sleep. You will breathe when I tell you to breathe." His gaze landed on Olivia, held there for 3 seconds longer than it had on anyone else, then moved on. But in that brief moment, Olivia saw something in his eyes. Recognition. Not of her specifically, but of something in her. "Some of you think you're ready for this," Walker continued. "Some of you think you know what it means to be a soldier. You're all wrong. You know nothing. You are nothing. We will break you down to your component parts and rebuild you into something useful. Most of you will succeed. Some of you will fail. A few of you should not be here at all. Olivia kept her eyes forward, her breathing steady. She had heard variations of this speech before. Different words, but the same message. They wanted to see who would flinch, who would show fear, who would start looking for the exit before training even began. She did not flinch. As the formation broke and they were herded toward the barracks, Walker passed close beside her. Without looking directly at her, he spoke so quietly that only she could hear. I served with a Reynolds once. Best shot I ever saw, but that was 20 years ago. Olivia's step faltered for just a moment before she recovered. Walker continued walking without waiting for a response. He didn't need one. He had seen the flicker of recognition in her eyes. Inside the barracks, the air smelled of industrial cleaner and old sweat, the particular scent of a place where thousands had passed through without leaving anything of themselves behind. Olivia claimed a bunk in the corner, the one nobody wanted because it was closest to the latrine and farthest from the door. She preferred corners. She preferred positions where she could see everyone and everything, where her back was protected, where she controlled the angles. A woman approached, tall and broad-shouldered, her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her name tape said, Morgan. Riley Morgan, she would later learn. Former state shooting champion from Ohio, the pride of her small town. You sure you're in the right place? Morgan asked, her tone carrying the weight of someone who had already decided the answer. Olivia looked up from stowing her duffel under the bunk. I'm sure. Morgan laughed, a short bark of sound. You look about 15. My little brother's bigger than you. Olivia straightened, meeting Morgan's eyes directly. I am 18, same as most of us here. Sure you are, Morgan said, walking away toward a cluster of women on the other side of the barracks. Olivia heard her voice carrying back, heard the words tiny and mistake and not going to last a week. The first night, they were given 45 minutes to shower, change into PT uniforms, and report for evening formation. Olivia moved through the chaos of bodies and noise, finding her rhythm in the disorder. She had learned long ago how to be present without being noticed, how to move through spaces like water, touching nothing, disturbing nothing, leaving no trace of her passage. When formation was called, she stood in her assigned position, third row, fourth from the right. Walker walked the ranks, his boots striking the pavement with metronomic precision. He stopped in front of Olivia, looking down at her from his considerable height. What is your name, recruit? He asked. Reynolds, drill sergeant. Olivia Reynolds. Are you lost, Reynolds? No, drill sergeant. You look lost. You look like you wandered into the wrong building and are too embarrassed to admit it. Behind her, McNally snickered. Olivia kept her eyes forward, her voice level. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, drill sergeant. Walker studied her for another moment, then moved on. But Olivia could feel the weight of judgment settling over her like a net. They had already decided who she was, what she could do, how long she would last. They had looked at her and seen limitation, seen weakness, seen someone who would break under the first real pressure. They had no idea what they were looking at. The first week moved like a fever dream, all shouting and running and physical demands that separated the prepared from the pretenders. Olivia watched 3 recruits quit before day 5, watched them pack their bags in silence, while the rest of Delta Company stood at attention in the common area, bearing witness to failure. Morning PT started at 04:30 when the sky was still black, and the air carried a bite that disappeared the moment the sun cleared the horizon. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, running until her lungs burned and her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Olivia kept pace, never at the front of the formation, but never falling behind, maintaining a steady middle position that drew no attention, provoked no comment. Morgan ran near the front, her longer legs eating up distance with aggressive efficiency. She had gathered a small group around her, three other women who moved as a unit, who ate together and studied together, and had already established themselves as the standard that other female recruits would be measured against. During the morning run on day 6, one of Morgan's group looked back at Olivia, her expression mixing curiosity with dismissal. "How's the kid doing back there?" she called out, and several heads turned. Olivia kept running, her breathing controlled, her pace unchanged. She had learned not to respond to provocation, not to waste energy on words when actions would eventually speak louder. The group laughed and faced forward again, increasing their speed slightly, putting more distance between themselves in the middle of the formation. In the barracks that night, Olivia sat on her bunk cleaning her rifle, the M4 carbine they had been issued that afternoon. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, the weight and balance triggering muscle memory that had nothing to do with the brief training session they had received. She field stripped it with quiet efficiency, her fingers moving through the process like a conversation she had memorized years ago. She checked the bolt carrier group for carbon buildup, ran her cloth along the gas tube, verified the extractor spring tension. All things they hadn't been taught yet, details beyond the basic disassembly procedure they'd been shown. Across the bay, a male recruit named Martinez watched her, his eyes narrowed. He was older than most, 26, former police officer from New Mexico. "You've done that before," he said, and it was not quite a question. Olivia looked up, meeting his gaze. "Everyone just did it," she said, "in training today." Martinez shook his head slowly. "Not like that. You move like you've been doing it your whole life." "I pay attention," Olivia said, and returned to reassembling the weapon. The bolt carrier group slid home with a satisfying click, and she performed a function check, the mechanical sounds echoing in the relative quiet of the barracks. Martinez stood and walked over, stopping a few feet from her bunk. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Montana," Olivia said, which was true but not the whole truth. She had been born in Montana, had spent her childhood on a ranch that bordered national forest, had learned to shoot before she learned to drive. What she did not mention was the rest of it, the hours spent with her grandfather, the man who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, who had been a sniper before the Army fully acknowledged that snipers existed as a formal specialty. "Montana," Martinez repeated. "That explains the shooting thing, I guess." "Everybody out there hunts, right?" "Something like that," Olivia said. The next morning brought their first marksmanship training, and Delta Company moved to the rifle range in a loose formation, voices rising in anticipation and bravado. The range sat on the eastern edge of the base, backed by a hill that served as a natural berm. Targets were arrayed at 50-meter intervals, stretching out to 300 meters. Master Sergeant Rodriguez stood at the firing line, his weathered face impassive as he watched the recruits file into position. He was short, compact, his movements economical and precise. 4 combat tours in Afghanistan, 3 Army marksmanship championships to his name. When he spoke, his voice carried without shouting, a quality that demanded attention rather than commanded it. "You will fire from the prone position," Rodriguez said, "unsupported targets at 100 meters. This is a baseline qualification. I'm not expecting excellence. I'm expecting basic competence. Some of you will not achieve even that." Rain had begun to fall, a light drizzle that would make the test more challenging. Perfect. More variables to navigate, more reasons for the unprepared to fail. Morgan was in the first group to fire. She took her position with confidence, her body settling into the proper stance with the certainty of someone who had done this before. When Rodriguez gave the command, Morgan engaged her target with measured shots, the rifle reports cracking across the range in steady rhythm. The spotting scope revealed a tight grouping, most shots within the center rings. Rodriguez nodded, made a notation on a roster, and called the next shooter forward. One by one, the recruits fired. Some shot well, some shot poorly, some flinched with every trigger pull. Their groups scattered across the target like buckshot. Olivia watched from her position in the waiting area, observed the subtle mistakes, the tension in shoulders, the improper breathing, the anticipation of recoil. When her turn came, she moved to the firing line and assumed the prone position, feeling the ground beneath her, solid and stable. The rifle settled against her shoulder, and she pressed her cheek to the stock, finding that perfect alignment where the sights, the target, and her eye existed in the same plane of focus. "Range is hot," Rodriguez said. "Engage your target." Olivia exhaled slowly, her finger finding the trigger, that small, curved piece of metal that connected intention to outcome. She had learned long ago that shooting was not about force, not about muscle or strength. It was about control. It was about finding stillness in the center of chaos, about making time slow down until you could see the space between heartbeats. The perfect moment when everything aligned. She fired 10 rounds, each shot a deliberate choice, each trigger pull happening at the exact moment when her body was most still, when her breathing was at its natural pause, when the rifle was an extension of her will rather than a tool in her hands. The magazine emptied and she engaged the safety, waiting for Rodriguez to check the target through the spotting scope. The rangemaster studied the target for a long moment, then looked at Olivia with an expression that was difficult to read. What she didn't know, what she couldn't see from her position, was that 8 of her shots had formed a grouping so tight it looked like a single hole in the center of the target. The other 2 were slightly outside the center ring, but still within the second ring. To the trained eye, it was obvious. Those 2 shots had been deliberately placed. No shooter who could put 8 rounds through the same hole would accidentally miss the center with the other 2. "Who trained you?" Rodriguez asked. Olivia stood, brushing dust from her uniform. "I grew up hunting," she said. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed slightly. "That is not hunting. That is something else." He looked down at his clipboard. "And you're deliberately missing. Why?" The other recruits nearby fell silent, sensing something unusual happening. Olivia said nothing, and Rodriguez studied her for another moment. "You are full of surprises, Reynolds," Rodriguez said quietly. "I wonder what other surprises you are hiding." As Olivia walked back to the waiting area, she felt eyes on her from every direction. The other recruits had seen something, had recognized that whatever had just happened at the firing line was different from what they had witnessed with the previous shooters. Morgan stood near the edge of the group, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When Olivia passed, Morgan spoke just loud enough for nearby recruits to hear. "Beginner's luck," she said. "Let's see how she does when the pressure is actually on." Olivia kept walking, but she caught Martinez watching her, his expression thoughtful, like he was solving a puzzle that had suddenly become more complex than he expected. The whispers started before she reached her position, spreading through the formation like ripples across water. That night, lying in her bunk, Olivia thought about the target, about the tight grouping that had drawn Rodriguez's attention. She had been careful, had held back, had deliberately placed 2 shots outside the center ring to avoid standing out too much. But even that had not been enough. Even that had been too good, too clean, too precise for someone who was supposed to be learning for the first time. She touched the photograph in her pocket, the one of her grandfather, and remembered his words from years ago. Sometimes, he had told her, the hardest part of being good at something is knowing when to hide it, knowing when excellence will protect you and when it will make you a target. Olivia closed her eyes and saw the Montana mountains of her childhood. Remembered the first time her grandfather had put a rifle in her hands. She was 10 years old, small for her age even then, but he had adjusted the stock, shown her how to hold it, how to breathe. "Most people think shooting is about seeing," Thomas Reynolds had told her. "It's not. It's about feeling. Feeling the wind on your skin, feeling the earth under your body, feeling the space between your heartbeats. They had spent hours each day moving through the forest like shadows, learning to read terrain, to predict wind patterns, to calculate distances without tools. Thomas had been retired for years by then, had left the military after his final tour in Afghanistan, had come home to Montana to disappear into the anonymity of civilian life. But he had not left his skills behind. And for reasons he never fully explained, he had decided to pass those skills to his granddaughter. "The world is dangerous, Emma," he had told her once when she asked why he was teaching her things most children would never learn. "And the most dangerous people are the ones who think they're invincible because they're bigger or stronger. I'm teaching you so you'll never have to be afraid of them." On the morning of day 14, Olivia was summoned to the company commander's office. She knew what was coming, had been expecting this conversation since the first range day, since the moment she had let her skills show more than she intended. The office was small, furnished with a metal desk, 3 chairs, and walls covered in unit photos and commendations. Colonel Harrison sat behind the desk, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a face marked by a scar that ran from his right temple to his jawline. Walker stood to his right and Rodriguez to his left, both men watching her with careful expressions as she entered. "Private Reynolds," Harrison said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Please sit." Olivia sat, keeping her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The colonel opened a folder on his desk, revealing a black and white photograph of a younger Thomas Reynolds in desert camouflage, a sniper rifle cradled in his arms. "I expected the granddaughter of the ghost of Kandahar to be taller," Harrison said, watching her reaction closely. Olivia's breath caught for just a moment, but she controlled her expression. "Yes, Private Reynolds," Harrison continued, "we know who your grandfather was. The question now is, do you know what he did?" Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying Olivia with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. "Your grandfather was part of a program called Nightshade," he said. "Started in 1998, CIA initiative. They identified individuals with exceptional potential for marksmanship before they ever enlisted, tested thousands, selected dozens, trained them in ways that violated conventional military protocols." Harrison tapped the folder with one finger. "Thomas Reynolds was one of their first subjects, and their most successful. 317 confirmed kills over 3 deployments, shots that defied the laws of physics, situations where success should have been impossible." Olivia remained silent, taking in the information without visible reaction. This was more than her grandfather had ever told her about his service. "The program was officially shut down in 2008, Walker added. "Congressional oversight raised concerns about the ethics of what they were doing, creating weapons rather than soldiers." "And then your grandfather disappeared," Rodriguez said. "Honorable discharge, moved to Montana, dropped off the grid. No contact with former operators, no interviews, no memoirs. A ghost in every sense of the word." Harrison slid a document across the desk. Olivia glanced down at it. "Top Secret" was stamped across the top in faded red ink. Below it, Project Nightshade. Subject 7, Thomas Reynolds. "What he wasn't supposed to do," Harrison continued, "was pass on the training. The techniques developed in Nightshade were classified. Your grandfather took an oath never to share them. Yet here you are, his granddaughter, shooting like you've been trained by one of the best snipers in American military history." "I never said my grandfather trained me," Olivia said, her voice steady. "You never had to," Rodriguez replied. "It's written in every movement you make with a rifle." Harrison pulled another document from the folder, a handwritten letter on yellowed paper. "We found this among your grandfather's effects after he died last year," he said. "It was addressed to me." Olivia's composure slipped for just a moment. She hadn't known her grandfather had left anything for the military. He had been so careful about covering his tracks, about protecting her from the legacy he'd created. "I'll read you the relevant portion," Harrison said. "If you're reading this, it means you found my granddaughter. I've taught her everything I know, not so she would follow in my footsteps, but so she would understand what Nightshade did to us. We weren't just trained, we were conditioned, programmed. I've spent 20 years trying to undo that conditioning, trying to teach Olivia not just how to shoot, but when to shoot, when not to shoot. The ethical foundation Nightshade deliberately stripped away. I took their skills and rebuilt the humanity around them. Don't make her into what they made me." The office fell silent. Olivia felt something tighten in her chest. Pride, grief, understanding. Her grandfather had never explained why he trained her so intensively, why he drove her so hard, why he made excellence the minimum standard. "So what happens now?" she asked. Harrison exchanged glances with Walker and Rodriguez. "That depends on you," he said. "We're offering you a choice. In 3 weeks, select officers from Fort Bragg will visit this base for an evaluation exercise. You can participate, demonstrate your skills, and almost certainly be fast-tracked to sniper school and special operations. Or you can keep your head down, complete basic training like everyone else, and choose a different path." "What would my grandfather want?" Olivia asked. Walker spoke, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I served with Thomas in Afghanistan in 2004. I was part of a ranger team that got pinned down outside Kandahar. We were done, surrounded, and then the enemy commander dropped, then his second, then the radio operator. 3 impossible shots through a sandstorm. I never saw your grandfather, never even knew his name until years later. But he saved my life that day." Walker paused, his eyes distant with memory. "Thomas was the best shot I ever saw, but he paid a price for that skill. The things they made him do in Nightshade changed him. That's why he disappeared. That's why he went to Montana. He was trying to find his humanity again." "Colonel Harrison wants to know if you can shoot like your grandfather," Rodriguez said. "I want to know if you understood what he was really teaching you." Olivia looked at each of them in turn, understanding that this moment would define everything that followed. Her grandfather had given her a gift, but it came with responsibility, with weight. "I'll participate in the evaluation," she said, "but not to become what Nightshade wanted to create. I want to show what my grandfather really stood for." The news spread through Delta Company like wildfire. No one knew the details, but everyone knew Olivia had been summoned by the command team and had returned different somehow, more visible. The invisible girl from Montana suddenly had the attention of officers who rarely bothered with basic trainees. Morgan cornered her in the laundry room that evening, her tall frame blocking the doorway. "What's your game, Reynolds?" she demanded. "First you sandbag at the range, then you have private meetings with the colonel? What makes you so special?" Olivia continued folding her uniforms. "I'm not special, Morgan. I'm just here to train like everyone else." "Bullshit," Morgan snapped. "They're treating you different." "Why? You somebody's daughter? Got friends in high places?" Olivia looked up, meeting Morgan's hostile stare. "My grandfather was a soldier, that's all." "Must have been some soldier," Morgan said, her voice laced with suspicion. "Because Rodriguez has been watching you like a hawk, and Walker actually called you by your first name yesterday. That doesn't happen to nobodies." Olivia said nothing, and Morgan's eyes narrowed. "Whatever game you're playing, I'm not impressed. Some of us had to work for everything we've got. I spent 4 years competing in state and national shooting matches. I earned my place here. You just showed up and somehow everyone thinks you're special." "I'm not your enemy, Morgan," Olivia said quietly. "No, you're just another entitled kid who thinks the rules don't apply to her," Morgan replied, turning to leave. "Good luck in the evaluation. I'll be watching when you fail." The next 3 weeks brought heightened scrutiny. Walker pushed Olivia harder than the others, demanded more push-ups, more miles, more discipline. Rodriguez had her demonstrate techniques for the other recruits. put her in positions where she couldn't hide her abilities, forced her to stand out when all she wanted was to blend in. The isolation grew. Other recruits kept their distance, uncertain about her status, confused by the special attention. Only Martinez treated her the same, sitting with her at meals, asking questions about Montana, sharing stories about his time as a police officer. "They're afraid of what they don't understand," he told her one evening as they cleaned their rifles side by side. "And you, Reynolds, are a walking mystery." "I never wanted to be," she replied. "Nobody ever does," Martinez said with a small smile. "But some of us don't get to choose." The evening before the evaluation, Walker found her sitting alone outside the barracks, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Your grandfather saved my life," he said without preamble, lowering himself to sit beside her on the concrete step. "But that's not the whole story." Olivia waited, sensing Walker had more to say. "After those shots, the ones that saved my team, I became obsessed with finding him, wanted to thank him. But he was a ghost. No one would acknowledge he existed. Then I got recruited for a program called Eclipse." "Another nightshade?" Olivia asked. Walker shook his head. "The opposite. Eclipse was created by operators who recognized what Nightshade was doing to its people, turning them into weapons without ethics, without boundaries. Eclipse was meant to be the counterbalance, training snipers who understood not just how to take the shot, but when and why." He looked at her directly. "Your grandfather helped start Eclipse. Secretly, after he got out, that's why he trained you the way he did. He wasn't preparing you to be a weapon like him. He was preparing you so you could never be turned into a weapon against your will." Olivia felt something shift inside her, understanding blooming. "The evaluation tomorrow is run by people from both programs," Walker confirmed. "Harrison reports to what's left of Nightshade's leadership. They want to see if the granddaughter of their greatest success inherited his gifts. They'll push you to demonstrate your skills, to be exceptional." "And what do you want?" Olivia asked. "I want to see if you understood what your grandfather was really teaching you," Walker said. "Not just how to shoot, but when not to shoot. Not just skill, but judgment." The day of the evaluation dawned clear and cool, a perfect day for marksmanship. The range had been expanded, targets set at distances from 100 to 1,000 meters. A dozen officers from Fort Bragg stood on an observation platform, watching as Delta Company filed into formation. Colonel Harrison addressed them, explaining that selected recruits would demonstrate marksmanship skills as part of a special assessment program. Morgan was called first, along with 3 male recruits who had shown exceptional skill on the range. Then Olivia's name was called. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood stepped forward, a tall, lean man in his early 60s with cold eyes and precise movements. He introduced himself as the Director of Advanced Marksmanship Training at Fort Bragg. "Today's evaluation has 2 parts," he announced. "First, standard qualification at distances from 300 to 800 meters. Second, an advanced assessment for those who qualify in the first round." The first phase began. Morgan shot remarkably well, hitting 9 out of 10 targets across the range. The male recruits performed with varying degrees of success, none matching Morgan's precision. Then it was Olivia's turn. She stepped to the firing line, conscious of the eyes on her, the officers from Fort Bragg, the instructors who had been watching her for weeks, the other recruits who still didn't understand why she was there. She settled into position, the rifle a familiar weight against her shoulder. Breathe in, breathe out. Find the space between heartbeats. The targets appeared in sequence. 300 meters. Acquire, adjust, fire, hit. 400 meters. Compensate for drop, fire, hit. 500 meters. Wind shifting left to right, adjust, fire, hit. Each shot was deliberate, each target neutralized with mechanical precision. When the final target fell at 800 meters, Olivia rose and cleared her weapon, aware of the silence that had fallen over the range. Perfect score. No misses. No hesitation. Blackwood approached her, his expression calculating. Impressive, Private Reynolds. Very impressive. But I'd like to see what you're really capable of. He gestured to a position at the far end of the range. For the advanced assessment, we've placed a target at 1,000 meters. Maximum effective range for this weapon system is approximately 800 meters. Beyond that, accuracy becomes problematic. Olivia glanced at Walker, who stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Then at Rodriguez, whose eyes narrowed slightly, a warning in his expression. "Sir," she said to Blackwood, "are you ordering me to attempt a shot beyond the effective range of this weapon?" Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm offering you the opportunity to demonstrate exceptional skill, Private, to show us what you can really do when pushed beyond standard limitations." Olivia understood the test now. This wasn't about hitting the target. This was about judgment, about knowing when to take the shot and when to refuse. She stepped to the firing line, settled into position, and studied the distant target through her scope. She calculated windage, elevation, bullet drop, the effects of temperature and humidity on the round's trajectory. Then she rose and cleared her weapon. "Sir, I cannot take this shot with the current equipment," she said, meeting Blackwood's gaze. "The probability of success is too low, and the risk of a stray round is too high. This would be an irresponsible use of my weapon." A murmur ran through the observers. Morgan looked confused, clearly expecting Olivia to attempt the impossible shot. The officers from Fort Bragg exchanged glances, some nodding, others frowning. Blackwood studied her for a long moment, his expression giving away nothing. Then he turned to Harrison. "She passes," he said simply. Confusion rippled through the recruits. Passes? How could refusing to take a shot be passing a marksmanship test? Harrison stepped forward. "The true test of a sniper is not how many impossible shots they can make," he explained, his voice carrying across the range. "It's knowing what shots not to take, judgment, discipline, ethics, the things that separate a soldier from a weapon." He turned to Olivia. "Your grandfather understood that too late. It cost him dearly. You, it seems, understood it from the beginning." The evening after the evaluation, Olivia was summoned to Harrison's office again. This time, only Blackwood waited with him, both men standing when she entered. "Please sit," Harrison said, gesturing to the chair. Olivia sat, aware that something fundamental had changed. The tension that had surrounded her for weeks had dissipated, replaced by something that felt almost like respect. "I owe you an explanation," Blackwood said, his cold demeanor from the range replaced by something more contemplative. "Today wasn't just an evaluation of your skills, it was a test of your character." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on Harrison's desk. The label read, "Project Eclipse." "Contrary to what you may have been told, Eclipse is not just the counterbalance to Nightshade," Blackwood continued. "It's the replacement. Nightshade was shut down because it created killers without conscience. Eclipse was created to train protectors with exceptional skill and uncompromising ethics." He opened the folder, revealing a photograph of a younger Thomas Reynolds standing beside a younger version of Blackwood himself. "Your grandfather helped design Eclipse after he left Nightshade. He understood better than anyone what that program did to its operatives, the psychological toll of becoming a weapon rather than wielding one." Olivia stared at the photograph, this new piece of her grandfather's history reshaping her understanding of why he had trained her so rigorously. "When Thomas disappeared to Montana, we thought he was done," Harrison added. "Then we learned he had a granddaughter he was training. We feared he was creating his own version of Nightshade, a legacy sniper who would inherit his skills without the ethical foundation we built into Eclipse." "But he was doing the opposite," Olivia said, understanding now. "He was teaching me everything Nightshade taught him, but adding what they left out. When not to shoot, why not to shoot?" Blackwood nodded. Today confirmed that. You demonstrated exceptional skill, but more importantly, you demonstrated exceptional judgment. You refused an order that would have violated the ethical standards of your profession. What happens now? Olivia asked. Harrison and Blackwood exchanged glances. That depends on you, Harrison said. You have options that weren't available to your grandfather. You can complete basic training and pursue a conventional military career. You can apply for sniper school through normal channels. Or, or you can join Eclipse, Blackwood finished, not as a weapon to be aimed, but as a protector who chooses her targets based on sound judgment and ethical principles. Olivia thought about her grandfather, about the skills he had given her, about the responsibility that came with those skills. She thought about what Walker had told her, about Thomas saving his team through that sandstorm, about the price he had paid for his abilities. I need time to decide, she said. Take all the time you need, Blackwood replied. The choice must be yours. That's the whole point. News of Olivia's refusal to take the 1,000-meter shot spread through Delta Company like wildfire, though few understood its significance. Morgan confronted her in the barracks that night, her usual hostility tempered by confusion. You had a chance to show off in front of all those officers, and you just quit? Morgan demanded. Why? It wasn't the right shot, Olivia said simply. But everyone was watching. That lieutenant colonel was practically daring you to try. That's why it wasn't right, Olivia replied. Taking a shot to impress someone goes against everything I was taught. The only reason to pull that trigger is if lives depend on it and you're certain you can succeed. Morgan stared at her, reassessing. Who are you really? Olivia considered how much to share, then decided on the truth. My grandfather was Thomas Reynolds. He was a sniper in Afghanistan. 317 confirmed kills. He taught me everything he knew, not so I would follow in his footsteps, but so I would understand the weight of what he carried. Recognition flickered in Morgan's eyes. The ghost of Kandahar? That was your grandfather. I read about him in a book about military snipers. They said he made impossible shots. They said he disappeared after his last tour. He did, Olivia confirmed. He went to Montana to escape what they'd made him into. To find himself again. Morgan sat on the bunk across from Olivia, her hostility replaced by genuine curiosity. So all this time, you really were special? No, Olivia said. I just had different training, different perspective. I thought you were here because of privilege, Morgan admitted, because someone pulled strings for you. I've been competing since I was 14. State championships, national qualifiers. I worked for everything I have. So did I, Olivia said. Just in a different way. Morgan nodded slowly. I misjudged you. I'm sorry. Olivia extended her hand. Start over. Morgan took it, a tentative smile replacing her usual scowl. Start over. The final week of basic training brought a surprising announcement. Due to her performance in the special evaluation, Olivia had been selected for an accelerated leadership development program. She would complete basic training with Delta Company, then report to Fort Benning for advanced individual training, followed by a direct path to officer candidate school if she chose to accept it. Walker delivered the news personally, finding her during a rare moment of downtime. It's unprecedented, he said, but so are you. What about Eclipse? Olivia asked. Blackwood's offer? Still on the table, Walker assured her, but they want you to have options your grandfather never had. A chance to develop as a soldier and a leader before you decide whether to specialize. Olivia nodded, grateful for the breathing room. What would you do if you were me? Walker considered the question carefully. I'd remember what your grandfather taught you, not just the skills, but the wisdom behind them. He gave you exceptional abilities, but he also gave you the framework to use them responsibly. That's rare, Reynolds. That's valuable beyond measure. He handed her an envelope, worn at the edges and sealed with wax. Blackwood asked me to give you this. It's from your grandfather. He left it with Eclipse before he died, with instructions to deliver it if you ever found your way to us. Olivia took the envelope, feeling its weight in her hands. Thank you, she said. Walker nodded and left her alone with her grandfather's final message. She broke the seal carefully and removed a single sheet of paper covered in Thomas Reynolds' distinctive handwriting. Olivia, if you're reading this, then you've discovered the truth about my service and about why I trained you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you directly. Some secrets are too dangerous to speak aloud, even to those we love most. What I did in Nightshade haunts me still. Not the shots themselves. Those were necessary. Those saved lives. But what I became in the process, a weapon rather than a man who wielded one, a tool without agency. That's what I fought to prevent for you. I taught you everything they taught me, but I added what they deliberately left out. Ethics, judgment, the weight of responsibility that comes with the ability to take life from distances where your target never sees you coming. You have a gift, Olivia. The same gift I had, but gifts can become curses if not tempered by wisdom. Whatever path you choose, Eclipse, traditional military service, or something else entirely, remember that the most important decision a sniper makes is not how to take the shot, but whether to take it at all. You are my legacy, but you are not bound by my choices or my mistakes. Forge your own path, make your own decisions, but never forget the weight of what you carry. With love and pride, your grandfather Olivia folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket beside the photograph she had carried since leaving Montana. For the first time since arriving at Fort Campbell, she felt certain about her path forward. The graduation ceremony for basic training was held on a clear autumn morning, the kind of day that reminded Olivia of Montana. Delta Company stood in formation, families and friends watching from bleachers as the commanding officer delivered a speech about service and sacrifice. Morgan stood to Olivia's left. Their initial animosity transformed into a tentative friendship built on mutual respect. Martinez stood to her right, the quiet former police officer who had recognized something in her from the beginning. As names were called and certificates distributed, Olivia spotted Walker standing with Harrison and, surprisingly, Blackwood. The three men watched as she crossed the stage, accepted her certificate, and rendered a precise salute. After the ceremony, as recruits scattered to find their families or load buses to their next assignments, Blackwood approached her. "Have you made your decision, Private Reynolds?" he asked. Olivia met his gaze with newfound confidence. "Yes, sir. I want to join Eclipse, not because it's what my grandfather would have wanted, but because it's where I can best use what he taught me." Blackwood nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Your grandfather would be proud, but more importantly, you should be proud. You've taken his legacy and made it your own." He gestured to where Morgan stood with her family. "Your friend has potential too, exceptional skill, though her judgment needs refinement. Would you recommend her for evaluation?" Olivia considered the question carefully. "Yes, sir. She's driven, dedicated, and has the capacity to understand the ethical framework Eclipse requires. She just needs the right guidance." "Like you had," Blackwood observed. "Different, but yes," Olivia agreed. "Report to Fort Bragg in 3 weeks," Blackwood instructed. "Your Eclipse training begins then. It won't be easy, but I suspect you're used to that." "One question, sir," Olivia said. "Will I still be able to protect people? To save lives rather than just take them?" "That," Blackwood said with a genuine smile, "is exactly the point." 1 year later, Specialist Olivia Reynolds stood on a ridge in northern Afghanistan, the same mountains where her grandfather had made his legendary shots. Through her scope, she watched a Taliban convoy moving through a valley below, approaching a village where a medical team was treating civilians. Sergeant Walker lay beside her, serving as her spotter, his experience and her skill forming a partnership built on mutual respect. 4 gunmen in the lead vehicle, Walker murmured. 2 more in the rear. They'll reach the village in 10 minutes. Wind? Olivia asked, though she could feel it on her skin, could read its patterns in the way dust spiraled across the valley floor. Left to right, 5 knots, variable. Olivia calculated distance, windage, elevation, bullet drop, all the variables her grandfather had drilled into her since childhood. The lead vehicle was 800 meters away, moving at approximately 20 miles per hour. A challenging shot, but well within her capabilities. Taking the shot, she said, her voice calm. She exhaled slowly, finding that space between heartbeats that Thomas had taught her to recognize. The moment when everything aligned. The instant when skill and judgment met purpose. The rifle reported once, the sound echoing across the valley. Through her scope, Olivia watched the lead vehicle's tire explode, sending the truck veering off the road. The convoy stopped immediately, the Taliban fighters taking defensive positions, their attention focused on the disabled vehicle and away from their intended target. Radioing for air support, Walker said, already transmitting coordinates. They'll be here in 5 minutes. Convoy is stopped and distracted. Medical team has time to evacuate the civilians. Olivia watched as the Taliban fighters scanned the ridgelines, searching for the source of the shot that had halted their advance. They would never spot her. She had learned from the ghost of Kandahar himself how to disappear into terrain, how to become part of the landscape. Your grandfather would have taken all 6 of them, Walker observed. No judgment in his voice, just statement of fact. Different mission, different rules of engagement, Olivia replied. We stopped the attack without loss of life. The medical team and civilians are safe. That's the objective. Walker nodded, understanding. That's the Eclipse way. That's your way. Olivia thought about her grandfather, about the weight he had carried for years after Nightshade, about the legacy he had left her. Not just skill, but wisdom. Not just ability, but responsibility. Let's move, she said, already packing her equipment. Exfil route Charlie. As they made their way down the backside of the ridge, disappearing into the landscape like ghosts, Olivia felt a sense of completion. She had taken her grandfather's gift and made it her own, had found her own answers to the questions that had haunted him. When to shoot, when not to shoot. The difference between being a weapon and wielding one. The responsibility that came with exceptional ability. The weight of a legacy redeemed. In the mountains of Afghanistan, where Thomas Ghost Reynolds had written his legend in blood and shadow, his granddaughter was writing her own. Different, but no less extraordinary. Not as a ghost, but as a guardian. Not as a weapon, but as a protector who understood the true weight of the gift she carried. The deadliest shot in Afghanistan was the one she chose not to take.